you, Paul, and thank you, Johan. I think both of you said that the studies and reports from IEA was very useful, but you have also both good ideas to step forwards. By this, I think we should open up for discussion with all of you. It could both be questions, comments, interventions. I've looked into a way to try to structure this discussion. I think it's impossible. I don't think we can manage to take one report first, the other ones afterwards. They are covering all of the same things. So I think we just open up, and I think we will try to take 4 or 5 comments or questions in a row, and then give the panels a chance. And we have a microphone here, so because we, as you can see, we are recording the session, so we will like to have the questions on mic. Who's first? Randall down there.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for some extremely interesting presentations. I have a lot of questions, but since there are a lot of people here, I'll only ask 1 or 2. But I think one thing that was quite impressive, I think it was from Tyler's presentation, and Paul mentioned it too, the shared savings. The energy performance contracting, you had a figure of which was about, if I understood it correctly, of the 310 billion, you had about 40% could be or was being financed by shared savings programs. That's a new figure for me. I've followed that market for quite a few years. Could you elaborate a little on that? Because if it's based on good data, it's extremely interesting, because it could mean a lot of the chase after financing is maybe right in front of us already. Thank you.
I thank you very much for very positive presentations and very exciting. I don't want to go home feeling that I'm the negative person here, but I do want to ask a critical question. I was interested in Paul Hodgson's points as to what we need to overcome in order to sell it. Another point I felt, and I say it humbly, is I think we need to be intellectually sound so that we win the arguments. And there were a couple of points that struck me as a bit problematic. One was the avoidance of a real engagement with the macroeconomic rebound effect. Seems to me that there are very considerable scholars who are saying that the rebound effect in industry is well over 100%, up to 700% in some industries. Okay, and I think that we really need to come to grips with that, because a lot of industry loves energy efficiency because it makes them richer and enables them to use more fuel and make more profit. The other part of it is just the empirical bit. There are 1 or 2 empirical bits that I'm wondering. I mean, this graph of there being so much potential in energy savings for domestic heating. I've worked in domestic heating for years, and I've read probably everything that's been written on it. We're getting 30% savings at maximum, and that's about all we can expect, really. So I think that we just need to make sure we get the empirical bit really sound, so that people, we're not just going, rah, rah, this is great. Sorry to be negative.
Anyone else? We have two questions over here, and after them we will take an answer session.
Thanks. Thanks very much to all the speakers for the really interesting presentations. My name's Erica Hope. I work for the European Climate Foundation. I have 2 questions, actually, both relating to the last panel. The first one is a question to Paul Hodgson, but maybe the IEA experts can comment as well. I guess it would be 1B of Paul's 5 points. How far do you think we can go in integrating some of these multiple benefits into the cost-benefit analysis approach of the policy making? And the second one is just a question to Joanne about the infrastructure point. Very much agree with you that it would be great if energy efficiency was regarded as a more integrated part of the energy system. In practical terms, what do you think that would mean? Are we in what kind of fora are we actually thinking about making energy efficiency be seen as part of the infrastructure system? Is that classifications for funding? Is that sort of government policy documents? Which sorts of things? Thanks very much.
Hi there, my name is Anders Fagernes. I'm a student at the moment of international business and politics, and what I want to look closer into is the sort of institutional barrier. There are some researchers who have found barriers between politicians and the bureaucracy. So it'd be interesting to have you, Paul, commenting on that. Where do you see that there are differences, and also the type of levels you have here, because you have it all the way from the EU down to a national member state level, down to a city level. So there are also, I mean, the transposition of these regulations and the legislation down to the actual implementation and control phase is quite large. So I would also like to ask you in the IEA, have you ever looked at that, or have you ever thought about looking at the institutional barriers that might be here? Thank you.
Thank you. By this, I also think we have questions to almost all of you in the panel. I think we'll start by over here by the IEA and the ESCO questions.
Just in some ways, first of all, I'd like to thank Paul and Joanne for their comments. So they were very, very instructive, and we very much appreciated them. If I could give a couple of reactions to that and hit some of the questions. First is, Paul, I actually am a carnivore. And I don't like sandals. I don't wear sandals. And in some ways, actually, that helps me because I'm also responsible for climate change on the IEA, and it actually helps me. And just to give you an illustration, I think it's relevant also for the energy efficiency discussion. We wanted to do some work on resilience, actually, we did with the UK. And the whole point we were trying to say, we want to have a meeting to talk about resilience, but resilience not because of issues related to polar bears, but because of issues related to money. And not in terms of the green economy making money, but the fact that climate change is going to have an adverse impact on people's financing. So it's basically, we wanted to have a series of forums which we've conducted on the issue of resilience for capitalists. And I think that's relevant to the energy efficiency side. The fact of the matter is, I think part of the problem that we run into on the energy efficiency side is everybody, for a variety of reasons, including the deep pockets, tend to be much more interested in supply side solutions to issues. People are much more interested, not just in the United States, the issues of shale gas and tight oil and the like. And so there's a psychological issue that we have to overcome. But in part to overcome that, we have to lay out the economic argument a lot better. I think the point that Joanne made, energy efficiency is about more for your money, or to put it another way, it's about energy productivity. I mean, it's striking. A lot of times we like to talk about energy intensity. There's some implication in there that basically there's a negative related to that. Carbon intensity, energy intensity. We talk about labor productivity. Everybody's computers helped enhance labor productivity. We need to talk about energy productivity issues. And in some ways, I'll come back to touches a little on the issue of the rebound effect. I mean, one of the points that we wanted to make in the multiple benefits work is some rebound effect issues are positive issues. They're not all negative. It depends on what your objectives are. Clearly, if you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it's negative. If you're in Europe and you're thinking about reducing demand for energy, it's negative. If sometimes you're in India and you're extremely poor and you want to be able to raise standards of living, the rebound effect is not negative. But having said that, what we really need to do is we need to get a better sense on what the rebound effect is, not only at a programmatic level, but also at an economy-wide level, so that we can have a better sense of what is the overall impact of energy efficiency and the role it needs to play in decarbonization. And it's something that is included in a lot of the IEA modeling today, but we need to get a better sense as to what is the appropriate figure. So that, just to touch on the issue of the rebound effect specifically. I think, Joanne, you made an important point that I tried to make, but you said it much better, which is that when we talk about multiple benefits, It's not a question of laying out the fact that there are 15 benefits out there. We actually had some discussions with policymakers who sort of said the kiss of death is to act like something produces 15 different types of benefits. What we're really saying is there are probably 1 or 2 or 3 benefits that are key in a particular situation. They will vary depending on what the objective is and the party you're dealing with, and it's a question of focusing in on those 1 or 2 key benefits. And then finally, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the issue. We need to make it real. We need to make energy efficiency real, and that's so that we can get to the point. And again, it's one of the objectives of capturing the multiple benefits publication as well as the market report benefits. It's amazing the amount of attention that supply-side solutions get. There's a lot of interest from non-energy experts in renewables and things like that. We have to get to a point where non-energy experts are just as excited about energy efficiency. And that also means that we have to be careful about how we deploy energy efficiency technologies. CFLs, I think deployment in the United States is probably, and elsewhere, is probably a warning to all of us about not necessarily getting too far ahead of the technology and making sure that we're thinking hard about what works for consumers. There's a behavior element in here too, but because we are the IEA, a lot of time we want to avoid getting too much into soft issues. We want to stay closer to issues of numbers and the like, so that we can continue to do some of the modeling, which we hope will continue to support what the EC is doing. Because let me just end up by saying that, from our perspective, the European Union, the EC continues to be a leader when it comes to energy efficiency, a global leader, and we hope that by the end of the week, something positive will come out of Europe, because that will be something that we'll all be able to build on going forward. And then I leave a couple of questions to Tyler and to me.
Yeah, just quickly on the shared savings questions. Actually, that's kind of a definitional issue. Third-party financing has a meaning in energy efficiency, and we didn't use it in that meaning in the market report. We meant third-party financing as any financing coming from a third party between buyer and seller of a good. And I know that in energy efficiency, it's actually discussed more along in the energy service contracts and that kind of thing. So what we mean by the 120 billion is just energy efficiency investments that are financed through debt and equity. So debt and equity from a third party. And so that would be why. But with that said, as the slide showed, the energy performance contracting market looks to be very large, at about 30 billion, and that's just in the countries that we were able to find the data for. So 120 billion is just financing that is coming for energy efficiency investments. And that's made from an estimate from the World Energy Outlook that did various types of sources on what type of financing was going to different sectors, the purchase of stock from different sectors. On the question about being intellectually accountable and methodologically sound, I couldn't agree more. The big problem we have is we don't have a counterfactual. And we try and construct counterfactuals based on efficiency not improving and that kind of thing, but they're hypothetical estimations. The only thing that I would say is that I don't think that erodes really the argument against energy efficiency. We've seen in countries that have experienced the largest efficiency improvement based on our indicators and based on the decomposition, that total final consumption started to level off even before the recession. There seems to be some type of relationship, and we don't know, what otherwise would have happened if we had not improved, or if we had not improved the efficiency of our stock. But it's some other weird world that's likely not nearly as good, with lower levels of per capita energy use and the like. So all I would say is that yes, we do construct hypothetical scenarios, but these are done in the purposes of advancing thought and discussion on what the role of energy efficiency is within the system. And we talked about rebound effect. We could have a whole session on rebound effect, but I won't go there.
Well, perhaps I can just answer a couple of the questions that went more directly to the multiple benefits issues. The one from Erica about that you call, but I think the multiple benefits work deals directly with how are we going to integrate the assessment of multiple benefits into the decision-making process. And we looked at that very clearly and set out some steps that would need to happen. And basically it's around, as I said, each step of the policy-making process, there is a role for the multiple benefits approach to play. So in the planning stages, multiple benefits which are relevant in the particular case need to actually be built into the objective setting process at planning stages. And that means as well doing the assessment, impact assessment of whatever benefits that particular context is seeking at the outset, along with the projections about expected energy savings or emissions. Those need to start being built into the models, and we talk a little bit about how that has been done and how that needs to be done better. And ultimately, I suppose it's about building these outcomes into the kinds of decision-making mechanisms that are already being used. We don't want to start reinventing the wheel, so it really means we need to be able to put financial values on these outcomes. As much as we say, the qualitative evidence is extremely important, and as Joanna mentioned, those stories about real people's experience are extremely compelling and important in a policymaker's decision-making process. To build these into the concrete steps that happen in policy decision-making, we also need the financial values so that they can be fed into cost-benefit analysis, assessment of payback periods. And there are more flexible approaches like multi-criteria decision-making analysis, which has been used in certain cases. But all of that depends on having a financial number to feed in. So the key is going to be looking for proxies for financial, for monetary values that we can attach to some of these more qualitative, intangible benefits. And perhaps I'll take the opportunity to respond to the question there about the institutional barriers. I think it's very connected. Certainly because, as Philip mentioned, we are starting to get outside the usual sphere of energy issues that we're all more familiar with. If we're really going to get a good handle on multiple benefits, we need to start at collaborating better with other disciplines, make sure that the right people are around the table when these issues are being discussed. So in practical terms, that probably means getting ministries to collaborate better horizontally. So get health ministries around the table when we're talking about energy efficiency, get the urban planning and infrastructure, get the transport people, and everybody can bring their areas of expertise to the discussion rather than sitting there as energy experts trying to imagine what the outcomes for health might be. And I think actually we have an example of that kind of way of operating. Getting into Sandals territory again, but the climate change issue is a kind of issue which is very cross-cutting. Many governments are facing climate change head-on, and to do so, it necessitates a collaboration across sectors. And those kind of models perhaps could be used for multiple benefits too. That's all from me, I think.
Okay, just responding, Erica, to your question about infrastructure and what it means in practical terms. Yes, of course, it would be lovely to get hold of a small portion of the infrastructure investment pot. So, great, yes, definitely. But slightly more fundamentally than that, I think we need to move the conversation away from cost and spending to investment. So many times you see policymakers talking about spending on energy efficiency, not investment in, and I think it helps with that. I want to see a more coherent approach to how we decide what to invest in terms of the energy system. And if the system stops at the meter, we're not going to come up with the right answer. The system needs to go all the way through. So it links to that. And then also I think if actually we start talking about it as part of our infrastructure, we can then start to have the conversation about how that infrastructure needs to be fit for purpose in the future. And it's broader infrastructure, it's housing as infrastructure. And at the moment, we treat new housing as infrastructure development, kind of, and existing housing not. And we don't seem to be able to have the conversation about making sure that existing housing is fit for purpose in the future. And dare I say the word regulation and existing housing. And I think if you start seeing things as infrastructure, you can start to talk about having to make them right. And it opens the door to those conversations.
Thank you. On the question about institutional barriers, there are no right answers to institutional questions. There will always be market failure and there will always be government failure. And a lot of the government failure, as well as failures within big firms, will be institutional questions. Having said that, I think there are some pluses about this policy-making context that we have in the European Union for this kind of work. A first one is that we have a diversity of experience which we have to pay attention to. I know in some national governments there's questioning about whether it's appropriate to work through pilots or not. We have no choice but to work through pilots, and that's actually a very effective way. Not pilots which we invent, but pilots which member states and regions invent. So we start with a richer policy basis than if we were one 500 million country rather than jurisdiction. And that's a starting point. Secondly, our democratic process, heavy though it is, ensures that those voices have to be listened to. So you don't just have a diversity of experience, you actually have rights for some of that diversity to make an impact. We, last week, passed 2 eco-design regulations on energy and emissions performance for solid fuel boilers and solid fuel local space heaters. We had 3 meetings for each of them. Bram from Belgium was in those meetings and who's here. We must, for each of them, have tried out a dozen different combinations of criteria to see whether that could generate a qualified majority. So you're needing 70% plus of the votes in the room. It was hard, serious work. We came to an outcome. It's an outcome which reflects the centre of where we worked until we found an outcome which reflects the centre of where the European Union wants to go. And we could only have done that if we had the democratic process rather than simply a consultative process. Thirdly, the fact that things get fixed at European level, at this thin European level, but implemented at the fat, legitimate, more legitimate national level, creates some interesting stickiness which goes something against the risk of, I know you see it, but the risk of on-again, off-again policy. It's hard to get policy through because I know you see it, but you need to go to heavy machines, but it's hard to undo it as well. And that's the kind of policy we need. So I like working in this institutional setting, although I see the weaknesses as well. To Erica's question, how far can we integrate into CBA? First of all, can our impact assessments include these impacts? Yes, they can. And we're beginning, but the work of the IEA will help us go a lot further. Secondly, this is a theological question, can they be in the same table as other results? And only if they come from the same model is the rule. So we have some discussions about whether we're going to have lots of different tables or whether we're going to have one table which compares in Chapter 5 of our impact assessments. But thirdly, can we express them in the same units? I don't think we should aspire, I disagree with Nina, I don't think we should aspire to express them in the same units. I think anyway our decision-making process is going to be a political one, that it's appropriate for the decision makers to have in front of them a quantification, if possible, of, or if not an evaluation, of the consequences of each policy option for each parameter. But turning it into a single number which tells you the best option is neither something I feel intellectually comfortable with, nor a particular help to effective policy making.
Thank you. Then we will open up for more comments and questions. We have at least 3 over here. The first one here, yes? Yep. Yep.
Gert-Jan Storm, I work with the University of Maastricht. I have information to share. There is a recent IMF working paper on co-benefits for the largest 20 emitters. And if you allow me, I could cite just a short quotation from that report because it relates to health and local air pollution. And it is about the importance of domestic co-benefits as they are described. The first observation is, which stated by IMF as striking, a substantial carbon tax is justified by national interests. On average, $57.5 per ton of CO2 across the top 20 emitters. And then it goes on to say that prices are efficient from a national perspective, but vary considerably across countries. And finally, it is about nationally efficient CO2 prices, excluding climate benefits. It goes on to say something about recommendations to fiscal policy, but I think it's interesting to look at it to find further support for work on co-benefits and how to make matters real. And I think that is the relevance of this contribution. I have no questions about it, but I'm glad that it's there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Greg Shreve from the Energy Saving Trust in the UK. My question is really around the benefits and realising how those multiple benefits, who they benefit. So within the context of the UK, one of our key energy efficiency in the domestic sector has been something called the Green Deal, whereby householders can get measures installed in their home at no upfront cost, and that they will, with the view that they will realise the energy savings which will pay back for those measures. Paul hinted at sort of the discount rates that are built into models whereby the models don't see people taking up measures such as loft insulation or something like that, because unless those savings are realised for themselves within the next 2 or 3 years, people ain't going to do it. How do policymakers, how should they consider when trying to get individuals to take up sort of energy efficiency measures, how should they account for those other benefits that perhaps aren't immediate financial benefits, but other sort of wider health impacts? Or even should policymakers be expecting the individuals to make those rational choices themselves?
Petr Holub, Chance for Buildings. I mean, coming from the Czech Republic, first I have to say that energy efficiency is sometimes promoted by those who wear sandals, but fossil fuels are often backed by those who wear socks in sandals. I mean, so which is much worse actually. But coming to the meritum of the presentations, I very much appreciate that International Energy Agency come up with in the series of books that strategically shifts the debate on energy efficiency further. And Joanna and Paul gave us a very good timeline. I mean, 33 years ago, the energy efficiency was fifth fuel. 3 years ago, you had problems, IEA challenging you of commenting on IE supporting energy efficiency, and now the energy efficiency is the first fuel. So I don't dig into comments on the concrete figures in the books, but what would be for us working on a national level very good if you can make a round through the national states, through the countries who actually are members of the OECD and who are covering some of the costs for developing these books, and present it to the governments, to the ministries, to the stakeholders, because that would be really of a high benefit for the work on the issue. Because often, I mean, now we see it, the decision comes mainly from the council on the energy efficiency targets, and it would be really appreciated if you can make a round through the Europe with similar workshop or similar presentation.
One more, yeah, one over here.
Hello, my name is Sonja Leitner from the German Energy Agency. I would like to know from Paul if you could give us an idea about the policy, or let me put it that way. You mentioned that now the policies on the EU level they are working, and now we are on track to meet the 2020 targets. We are now talking about the 2030 targets. So, and we have got a core directive, I would call it a core directive, with the energy efficiency directive, but with a focus on the 2020 targets. So I guess there is a need to further develop those directives, and PPD was up for due for a revision as well. So could you just give us an idea how to shape the energy efficiency market after 2020 in terms to achieve 2030 targets? I hope there are going to be some targets, so we are just still waiting for the results, but that would be great.
Okay, thank you. We will take and give the panel again a chance to answer. There was a few for, at least for multiple benefit. So, Dina?
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I should start by responding to Paul's comment. And actually, I fully agree with you, Paul. The point I was trying to make is that actually there are a lot of benefits that can be attributed financial values relatively easily that still aren't being incorporated into the benefit cost analysis. But that's not to say that the more intangible benefits, the things like comfort taking and social activity, better engagement in society, those things that are harder to measure financially should still be taken into account. So yes, we need to have dual approaches, qualitative and quantitative. In terms of the comments that went to multiple benefits from the floor, there was one from Energy Savings Trust there about the challenge of communicating the value of energy efficiency to the individual household when they're thinking about making an energy efficiency investment. Well, I think you're absolutely right that the multiple benefits work is going to help craft these messages in a way that the general public can understand. So coming back to this issue of talking about the real value of energy efficiency. Individuals making investment decisions are not interested in unit energy savings, but they are interested in increasing the comfort inside their home, increasing the productivity for their children at school, being able to travel more easily, get to work, consider other job opportunities. So that's the kind of message that we should be delivering that we haven't delivered so far. And perhaps the other element of that is also choosing the right person to deliver that message. So Joanne's stories again mentioned using trusted individuals to deliver these messages. So perhaps devolve some of this communication to a more community level. That said, the importance of explaining the value of individual investment is key, but we need to keep in mind that there will always be a role for government-supported energy efficiency initiatives, certainly when it comes to the fuel poverty issues and low-income parts of society. I think that was the main part that went to the multiple benefits issues. Was there?
So on that, I guess a couple of reactions to the comments made from our colleague from the Czech Republic. The first thing is, I think it's from the fifth fuel to the hidden fuel to the first fuel. But I think it's important to understand in terms of our numbers, it's the first fuel for the 11 IEA countries that we analyzed. Actually, those set of countries were the countries for which we had sufficient data covering enough decades to be able to generate the 2011 figure. But also generally, just so you know, we are a multilateral organization made up of OECD countries, and what we do as part of our governance structure is we actually present these reports to our member countries that include often Peter. Mm-hmm. So we have something called the Energy Efficiency Working Party, which oversees our work specifically and includes members from the Czech Republic and other countries, and we presented this report to them last September, and we have some other oversight committees. We have an opportunity to present it to country delegates as well as sometimes to travel here. We have a limited budget, unfortunately, so it doesn't allow us to do a nice grand tour, which I would love to do, but maybe at some point it would be nice.
Thank you.
I think the only question that I want to comment on it, Greg, is yours about how should policymakers account for the multiple benefits. I'm not going to address how they should account for it in their own appraisal of the policy, but it would just be a really good start if they actually started talking about them. One of the reasons the Green Deal is not delivering what it's meant to deliver is because the focus is on it'll save you money. A little bit of money, maybe, if you're lucky. If only they would start, and get other people to start, talking about it'll make your home a nicer place to live in, people might actually sit up and pay attention.
On that point, I often think people are irrational when they don't invest in energy efficiency and irrational when they do. So actually accounting for what we as individuals feel is very difficult. When the guy came round from the electricity company and said, if you buy a day-night meter, it'll pay for itself in 2 years, it's €100, I said, you should be paying for that, and we didn't do it. When my mother gave me €10,000 as a kind present to spend on the house, and we really had a warmer. Unfortunately, as an energy efficiency nut, I'm going to be obliged to see whether they affect my energy consumption at all, and I fear that we should have bought the meter instead. So, how you account for that, and there's some very interesting Swiss studies which go down that line. There's a Swiss study that shows people's discount values, whether you do stated preference work, are much shorter than 17.5%, number one. Number two, their investment in energy efficiency measures has no correlation with their discount value, as expressed in surveys. So whatever's going on among us, we don't understand at all. I'm quite glad that in our eco-design work, we have a least life cycle cost for the purchaser test. There are people who argue that we should be going beyond that, but we try to set the minimum where we set the ban at the point where the product just above the minimum is the cheapest over the life cycle. Of course, as time goes on, the products above that level will get more efficient. But I think it's not a bad thing to have a money in your pocket test to all our nice policies, even though the arguments that we've been discussing today justify going further. My wife bans me from wearing socks in sandals, and I've never understood why, and now I understand she thinks that I would be mistaken for an oil mogul. And so luckily, I don't do that. More seriously, my deputy, Claudia Canavari, had a very rich and stimulating visit to Prague a couple of weeks ago to really exchange with people in the business sector and people in the government sector about energy efficiency. If we're going to do what I said in answer to the earlier question, we need to find out what the richness is in member states, and it's a priority for us, even if it can't be for the IEA with much less resources, it is a priority for us to travel and to learn from member states. To Nina, I think we're still disagreeing, despite your heroic efforts to agree with me. I think we don't have to, even the things we can quantify should be often presented as, monetized rather, should often be presented not as one sum, but as two different financial results. That goes back a bit to what I was saying about least life cycle costing for individuals. We need to know what our policies are going to cost to individuals. We need to know what it's going to do to the public balance sheet, but adding the two together may obscure some information which is relevant to the policymakers. So I'm cautious about putting them into one number. And to Sonia from the German Energy Agency, well, first of all, we may all be out of a job if things go badly on Monday, all of us. I mean, you'll be in work. But the energy labelling directive, the label is no longer fit for purpose because A+++++++ isn't a way we can go. So first piece of legislation we will propose to our new hierarchy will be to sort out the labelling legislation. There's in any case a review of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive due by the 1st of January 2017. That directive doesn't stop in 2020, but we can look at how we can perfect it. The Energy Efficiency Directive has some key obligations which run out in 2020. So if we do have a 30% objective, then we would be proposing that we change Article 3 so that it embodies we need objective. So member states would need to set their objectives at national level, blah, blah, blah. And we would be proposing that the cut-off in Article 7 on 2020 for measures that count towards energy efficiency obligations would be removed. When I say proposing, I mean to our bosses, not to the world at large, because our bosses don't exist yet. I mean, Mr. Arias Cañete is still a commissioner designate rather than a commissioner, for example. There are lots of arguments on the Article 7 thing. It would make it more efficient between now and 2020 if there was an incentive to go for the more long-lived measures as well. Alongside that, whatever we do, we need to work on finance and establishing the right framework for finance, and we can do that in parallel with the legislative work.
Thank you. Two small observations from my side. First, based on Danish experience, we have seen over the last 20 years that there is a huge investment in households in new kitchen and bathrooms. And I don't know how to calculate the payback period of a new kitchen. And I think the average lifetime of a kitchen in Denmark is maybe less than 10 years. But what we could learn about that is to understand why are people invested in a new kitchen. It's not because they earn more money and save money for afterwards. And I think the health issue and the comfort issue of insulating your house could maybe be highlighted to get an efficiency improvement sometimes at the same level as the kitchen and the bathroom. That's one point. Then a point maybe to Philip. We have to reduce energy consumption. That go downwards. And I know that a lot of people don't like curves go downwards. So they, instead of talking about intensity go downwards, they talk about productivities which go upwards. But it's exactly the same. But some people like curves going upwards, but energy consumption has to go downwards.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Yes, Peter, maybe you in Denmark need to do that. And maybe no, let me just finish what I'm saying. Maybe in the European Union as a general proposition that makes sense, maybe in the United States that makes sense. But in many parts of the world, that is not necessarily the case. In very poor parts of the world, reducing energy consumption is not the critical issue and is not what is needed at a global level. Fighting poverty and things like that is what is needed in much of sub-Saharan Africa. And the world can accommodate that from a climate perspective. So in some sense, for many parts of the world, the issue is energy productivity, not energy intensity. And when it comes to your kitchen, I agree.
Okay, we have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions more for our last round. And I think we've Ian first here.
Thank you. Ian Lees, RAP Europe. The reason people invest in new kitchens is it adds the value to their home. And we haven't really heard much about asset increases. Now, we know that energy efficiency is not a big asset creator. It tends to be double glazing is perhaps the biggest single one. But I do think there is increasing evidence from the studies in the UK and from Europe, and I think we should be making more of the increase in asset value along with the comfort, along with a way to live, etc. It's all about behavior change, which is tricky.
Lucinda?
Lucinda McLagan from the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. I was very interested in the market report, and one of the slides, Tyler, you showed, said energy efficiency will grow, but we need more transparency and standards for financial products. And we all know that that there's money out there, but it's difficult to get it to be invested in energy efficiency. And one of the issues is the size of the projects, whether they're bankable. And I'm just wondering, what kind of standards are you thinking about?
Michel Guichon. First point, it seems that if someone presses on the yes or we button, we might save some energy on the beamer. So we are discussing about energy efficiency being mainstream among policymakers, but it's not yet really a discussion we have with friends at dinner. So maybe there is also the question of the right messenger. Do we need important people, or maybe people from the TV or from the showbiz to say, oh, I'm doing this for energy efficiency, and I'm actually doing it, and I have these and these benefits. And the last point is about the possibility for maybe markets to bring solutions to energy efficiency when public policy is lacking. I'll take an example. It's complex. I mean, it's a Belgian example. We have nuclear power stations now not being working, so a risk of blackout or at least brownout for the winter. And it's not clear what the policymakers will bring in terms of solution. I mean, there is a risk, but there are initiatives from NGOs, from group of customers, and from green entrepreneurs who see the potentials there for actually all for citizens to save their energy in terms of solidarity to prevent the power to be cut for at other levels. Thank you.
I'll be brief as I won't take the floor from Rando. Stamatis Sivitos from ECOS, Brussels-based NGO, part of the Cool Products for a Cool Planet campaign. This comes at a very timely moment, this workshop. Thank you very much to ECEEE for organizing it, as well as the reports launched by the IEA. I would just like to share the frustration we have felt within the campaign the last few months in the runner-up to the European Parliament elections, as well as the hearings of various commissioner designates when we hear attacks on specific products such as taps and showers, coffee machines, and lately in September, the media vortex around vacuum cleaners all over make cost-effective sense, as Paul has referred to. As the Cool Products campaign, we work to increase the profile of eco-design and energy labeling as policies contributing to the 2020 EU energy savings target. There has been great ideas floating around the room today, whether we need to have more high-level people, whether we need to have famous US actors advocating for coffee machines, for example, maybe, as well as the other benefits that IEA has put on the table, such as the 99 billion due to energy efficiency as a reduction to public budgets from the health benefits. So thank you very much for this great work, and of course we're looking forward to the work by the Commission and the proposal that will be tabled next year, which we hope will further reinforce and strengthen these very important policy instruments. Thank you.
Last one up here.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Cormans, University of Geneva, and I would like to make a remark. We often speak about investment without defining what it is an investment. And the more generic definition is to say an investment is when I spend money in the hope to receive money back in the future. So it's very uncertain, but it means in the hope of receiving money back in the future. If you spend money in a kitchen, you don't invest because you don't. If you will get money back in the. Still, it may be interesting to make a spending, so it is a pure spending, but it will increase your comfort and your pleasure to cook and to be in your home, and you can compare that with. So in that way, making a new kitchen will be to incorporate this spending into your core business as a household, because you are doing cooking. In a company, it is the same. If you want to increase the interest of companies in energy efficiency, you need to move that into core business of companies. And this is precisely the interest of the multiple benefits of energy efficiency. You can find a way to transfer energy efficiency into the core business of companies. And this also attracts interest from finance people and upper management, generally speaking.
Thank you. We give the panel a final chance to answer and final comments. Several of the intervention here was mostly comments and not questions. So, but if we can take all of you, if you have something to say here from.
There was one question on standards and financial products, and what do we mean by that? You raised an interesting point that, I mean, maybe it's self-evident in talking about energy efficiency finance, but the issue doesn't appear to be a lack of finance necessarily. There's a lot of it out there, 80 trillion or what is the latest count. And in reviewing, I was speaking with some people at the break, reviewing some of the corporate green bond issuance. There was a significant amount of market demand to buy into those corporate green bonds that were specifically on building retrofits. So when the product came to market, the market responded and lapped it up. Now, the reason that those corporate green bonds were attractive is that there was institutional architecture around buying into those bonds, meaning that you were buying into the risk of those firms. You weren't necessarily buying into the repayment risk of the retrofits. You were buying, say, with GDF Suez, you were buying a piece of GDF Suez. So maybe I should stop. Maybe. I don't want to anger anybody. And so to get on the standards piece, what we found was really interesting, and it was happening almost as we were writing the chapter, is more initiatives were coming up based on improving the transparency, pooling the monitoring and verification, providing clearinghouses for investors and other financiers to evaluate and to transparently evaluate what the risks were. So it seems like the most innovation was coming, not necessarily in providing financial vehicles, but in actually reducing the risk of those products through, making data transparent, through, standardizing the application formats for different, there's a lot of kind of mundane and boring standardization standardization is always fairly mundane and boring, but it was especially mundane and boring that we're talking about, how you fill these out and who these pass through and those kind of things. And those are, we tend to discount it over the surface on that, but they're really important from a barriers perspective for unlocking this finance. So we talk at length about it in the chapter. I won't go into each type of standardization effort, but it was more so on the soft side, facilitating the supply of energy efficiency finance connecting to the demand. There's this space, but they're not firing fully on all synapses yet, and there's a lot of work still to be done to just get them to connect fully, and that's what we mean by standardization.
I guess I'll just take the opportunity to respond to the various comments that were made. I agree with most of what was said there. I think what Ian said about the issue of asset values and motivating investment in kitchens is actually a very compelling one, and there's plenty of evidence starting to emerge about the concrete improvement in asset values that energy efficiency can generate. And that's not just a driver for the family wanting a nicer kitchen, it's also an important driver for the commercial property owners who are looking to improve the value of their investments on a commercial scale. So to that extent, perhaps I'm disagreeing with Catherine a little bit. I think there is actually a financial return you can imagine in investment in kitchens. But I also agree with what you said about core business. So whether it's the core business of the household, that's actually quite an interesting perspective on it. We've certainly been and actually working directly with Catherine on this issue of core business for industry and how starting to talk about energy efficiency as going to sort of value creation, core business issues for industry is probably going to be the best way to break through their reticence about energy efficiency investments. We need to start talking about the issues that they're interested in around not go to them and say, oh, energy efficiency is so exciting. That's really an issue for the engineers and maybe the economists, but the boardroom wants to know about what's it going to do to their bottom line and their business case. If we could get Leonardo DiCaprio to march for energy efficiency, I think you're right. I think we'd probably have a much better chance of pushing it up the political agenda. So I've noted that down to try and get in touch with him next week. No, but perhaps just to finish then, I should say, I think actually coming back to what Paul said at the outset, that the main challenge from a multiple benefits perspective is this leaping this boundary from the theoretical, where we're all pretty much agreed that we know there's benefits out there. How do we move from that to the practical application? And that is a real challenge, and it's one we've tried to take on in the Capturing the Multiple Benefits book. We think we've charted the beginnings of a course towards some concrete evaluations. I have to say, I never thought I'd be defending my position as being too traditional in the Multiple Benefits book, but you've got a point. Perhaps we need to start being more open to some more unconventional methods, and I'm converted on that.
Well, I would just like to actually thank ECEEE, thank all of you for this opportunity to, on the one hand, share our work with you, and also to get your feedback, a lot of interesting comments for us to digest and take back and think about how we need to adjust our approach, think about our next market report and how we carry forward on the multiple benefits work. So from Tyler, Nina, and my perspectives, we want to thank you all for spending the time with us this afternoon.
Okay, just a few final comments in response to what people have said. Ian, asset value. I'm going to say it again, minimum efficiency standards for existing buildings. If you want to make it an asset positive thing, make it something you've got to do. Anyway, that's slightly controversial, but I'll leave that one out there. Catherine, interesting. Investment versus spending. I'm going to take it away and think about it. I think it's very interesting. I would say, though, that people in the UK talk about investing in a new kitchen, not because they expect to get money back, but because they expect to get value of some sort. So it's different use of terminology, but I want to take that away and think about it. And just one final comment. Michelle, you said we don't yet have the conversation with our friends. I do.
Thank you. One measure, Leonardo DiCaprio is one measure of whether we are penetrating some barrier. Another measure I feel tempted to use, from time to time we get young researchers coming to us and asking us to describe policy processes that we've been involved in. I still get more for the biofuels work that I was doing at the end of the last decade than I do about the efficiency work that I'm doing now. So young researchers are still more interested, mind you, it's a glorious row, the biofuels row, so I can understand it, but more interested in that than efficiency. So I'm very glad to have the question from you, sir, about institutional factors affecting energy efficiency policymaking. And more generally, I appreciate the way that ECEEE and IEA have set up this event, because you are asking questions about policymaking, and it's quite interesting to discuss that and to reflect on how we can optimise our policy-making processes in this area, as well as how we can optimise our policy.
Okay, thank you all of you. Before I close the session, I would maybe give also a short comment to Ian, because in Denmark we have several studies about how the energy certification of a housing has affecting on the price when the house is sold. And we have seen for one-family houses that if you go from D and one step up and that continue up to C, the value increase about 100 euro per square meter. And we have several studies showing that. So, and you can easily, if you have a house on which are ND level, by investing 100 euro per square meter, improve it up to a level higher, and then you can have that money back when you sell it. So we have studies about that, and it is very important. I think we are coming to the end of the session. I want to thank all of you, the speakers especially, the IEA, on Paul and Joanne for giving good comments. I think this cooperation between IEA and ECEEE has shown to be very successful. I hope we could maybe find ways to do something together in the future. When the head of states by the end of this week decide on an ambitious energy efficiency target, all of us has a huge task afterwards to deliver. And some of these things which we have heard today can help us to deliver in a better way. So, and if they don't agree, we still have a task to deliver. And so it can be useful for us too. Then we will, before we close, the ECEEE will have our General Assembly the 19th of November in the afternoon, and we will also organize a policy seminar at that date, so you will get more information of that in the near future. But just to early warning. By this I will close the session, and there should be a cocktail outside for all of you, and thank you for coming.